for the very first Axios House at the Republican National Convention. This is the first time we've done this since our launch in 2017 as a media business. I'm Stef Kight. I'm a politics reporter at Axios. And if you are following along with our live stream, following along on social media, please use our hashtag Axios House. We have a great lineup today and this week. Reminder that tomorrow we have our events with Donald Trump Jr., Congressman Jim Jordan, and our event on the power of Latino voters. If you want to join any of those upcoming events, you can find one of our amazing staffers who are here running these events, and they can give you more information there. But I am pleased to welcome our very first guest for our very first event, for our first RNC Axios House, Senator Steve Daines, who is the NRSC chair. Senator, thanks for coming here and being with us today. I feel like we have to start with the latest news. J.D. Vance will be the running mate for former President Trump. Would love your reaction to that pick and how this impacts Senate races across the country and in Ohio.
Yeah, it's a great pick. Of course, J.D. is a colleague. I know J.D. very well. I was campaigning for J.D. back in 22 in his Ohio Senate race. Remember there in the Cincinnati area closing out the last 3 days. My father's a Marine. J.D. Vance will be the first U.S. Marine ever to serve as vice president. I think J.D., we all know how smart he is, but I'll tell you, his personal story in terms of how he grew up that so many Americans know about, he relates to many Americans today that feel like they're left out of what's going on in the economy and generally in life. I think he will do something for the ticket that's important, has an appeal to lunch bucket Democrats. That reminds me, when I was growing up in Montana, my great uncle was a union steward at a smelter and one of those lunch bucket Democrats that back in those days would have been an FDR guy, would have been a Mike Mansfield guy in Montana. But today, if he were alive today, you lived in Great Falls, Montana, somebody like J.D. Vance would appeal to him. He would be one of those lunch bucket Democrats that feels like they've been left behind by the Democrat Party as that party has gone so far left. And I think J.D. will help for Trump to win, to get the electoral map sealed. He needs to win the same states that he won in 2020, plus Georgia and Pennsylvania. He's up significantly in Georgia right now. I think J.D. Vance would be a big help in winning Pennsylvania.
Yeah, are there Senate races in particular that you think J.D. Vance, as the VP pick, will help you win in November?
Yeah, well, clearly we look across the battleground states, and the presidential battleground and Senate battleground states overlap in many cases. We see the map right now as 10 states, probably expanding maybe to 11, maybe 12. But at the moment, you probably take West Virginia off the map because Jim Justice is going to win that race after Joe Manchin retired. And Trump is going to win West Virginia by 40 points. We're not spending resources there. The Democrats aren't spending resources there. So that takes us to 50-50. And now we would need to pick up one more seat out of the next 8 or 9, and that would give us the outright majority if we didn't have J.D. Vance as vice president. But with J.D. as vice president, we have the majority now. We would want to build a more robust majority, add a few more seats. But I think J.D. is going to help us in states like Montana, like Ohio, when you think about Tim Sheehy's race in Montana, Bernie Moreno's race in Ohio. I think it's a big help, frankly, in Ohio as President Trump picks a son of Ohio. That's going to help Bernie there in that race.
Yeah, makes sense.
Well, and I guess it should be worth pointing out and thinking of the electoral map. Mm-hmm. I mentioned Pennsylvania. That's going to be a help, I think, for Dave McCormick as well. I think it helps him in Wisconsin. Again, you think about these Midwest and these more history of, again, those lunch bucket Democrats. That's a lot of our Senate battleground states, and it's a lot of our presidential battleground states too.
Well, I do want to note that it was just 2 days ago that there was an attempted assassination of former President Trump. I wanted to ask, have you spoken with the former president since then?
So I texted him right when the news had broken. I didn't feel like it was appropriate to probably call him at that moment. I did call Dave McCormick, who was at that Butler rally. He was in the front row. Dave is a West Point graduate, native from Pennsylvania, also served in the 82nd Airborne, had been deployed to Iraq. And I got Dave on the phone, and it was a very chaotic situation. He just assured me he was fine. He said, I think President Trump's okay, because he saw him walk off, but still you just don't know in that moment until he's checked out by medical professionals. But I mean, literally, as I was chatting with him, he's getting other inbound calls from family members, just checking in. I didn't want to take up his phone line, but it was just assuring to know that Dave was okay. We were just, of course, he was aware that there had been some people critically wounded, did not know at that time that fire chief had lost his life, and there were two other, innocent members of that political rally that were hurt. It's also been reported, and Dave didn't tell us, I'm just reading what I'm reading in the news, is that it sounds like his kind of battlefield instincts of taking care of people, of mobilizing and making sure those around him are okay. He was assuring those who were certainly in a very frightening moment that it's going to be okay, and very protective, and just proud of the leadership he demonstrated at that really difficult moment.
Yeah, so we've heard from President Biden, who has said that he thinks, we need to bring the temperature down. Trump has said we need to unify the country. You're in the middle of an election year. How do you balance responding to a very heated political moment while also doing what you need to do to win a majority in November?
Well, I agree. This is a moment to take the temperature down. The rhetoric and hateful rhetoric and over-the-top rhetoric is not a one-party problem. This extends across both parties. But I think it's very important at this moment, and hopefully litigating the rest of the election in the next 3.5 months, that we try to take the temperature down. I think the American people are yearning for more of a policy debate versus a personality kind of contest. And the more we can talk about the contrast in policies, the more I think the better off we'll be here in litigating this election. And I think the American people are looking for something here that's a little less divided in terms of kind of the normal partisan attacks.
How are you encouraging Republican Senate candidates to do that, to lower the temperature while they're trying to win seats?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's something that we've just encouraged our candidates to, as you think, first of all, with what's going on with the presidency, and as we're litigating these Senate races, it's a fact that most of these incumbent senators have voted with Joe Biden 95% of the time. That's just an empirical fact. And if you look at what the Democrats are messaging back home, especially in some of these states that tend to be a little more center-right or red, they're running as far away as they can from President Biden. In fact, we kind of jokingly said, I'm willing to buy a tank of gas there in Air Force One to bring Biden into Ohio, into Montana. We're happy to pay for that. They want to stay thousands of miles away from Joe Biden or Kamala Harris because they know that's a liability, not an asset. And contrast that to President Trump and J.D. Vance. Our Senate candidates want that ticket in places like Montana and Ohio, and you're probably going to see them there.
So speaking of some of these policy areas that you want to focus on this election cycle, inflation has been a top voter concern repeatedly in the polls. What would Republicans do if you win back majority in the Senate to actually provide relief for families who feel like they're struggling paying for their lives right now?
Yeah. I think there's a couple things. And some of you, I'm sure, remember the debates we were having, thoughtful and sometimes heated debates, shortly after President Biden was elected, and they had control with Kamala Harris in the Senate as the tiebreaker, 50-50, and they had the majority in the House. Remember, there was $1 trillion of unspent COVID money sitting on the sidelines in December of 2020. Now, election happens, they come to Washington, and they jam through on a purely partisan basis a $1.9 trillion COVID stimulus package. So you take $1 trillion sitting on the sidelines, add $1.9 trillion additional, so nearly $3 trillion shoving into the economy. That's inflationary. In fact, Lawrence Summers, who was Clinton's Secretary of Treasury, he sided with us. He was warning the Democrats of saying this will ignite inflation. And so the first thing we need to do is not repeat those mistakes of launching, I'll call them cash cannons of borrowed money into the economy, which have an inflationary effect. I think second would be when you start looking at our energy portfolio in the country. I'm a chemical engineer by degree. I love talking energy, and I'm passionate about it for a lot of reasons because I think it's very important for economic security and frankly for national security, as we've seen what's happened with the Ukraine invasion, what that means to energy for Europe. But every year we need about 2% more energy than we needed the year before. That means in 25 years, we're going to need about 50% more energy than we need today. So we need to be expanding our energy portfolio, not restricting it. And the Biden policies of just killing the Keystone Pipeline out of the gate, which comes into Montana as the first state as it comes down from Canada, putting a pause on LNG exports, EPA launching rules that will shut down baseload power. You sum that up, it's starting to reduce the amount of energy potential we have. And over the long haul, that will be inflationary because energy demand is going to keep going up. And then you think about the AI revolution going on. I just had heard Eric Schmidt speak recently. I mean, the demands on the grid and baseload power are going to continue to significantly increase as we start to embrace AI further.
Yeah. Speaking of inflationary policies, former President Trump has said he would impose 10% tariffs across the board, 60% tariffs on Chinese imports. Experts have warned that this would raise prices for Americans. What do you think about that proposal?
Yeah, well, we've got to think through the very real problem, what's going on in terms of global competitiveness as it relates to, like, China as an example. Many of you know I spent 6 years living in China. When I graduated from college, my first 13 years was with Procter & Gamble. 6 of those years were actually living in China, launching American brands and businesses to compete against the Chinese. This is back in the 90s. We had 2 kids born in Hong Kong at the Matilda Hospital on top of Victoria Peak. So I'm very aware of the challenge we face right now as it relates to the trade imbalance with China. I embrace free trade principles, but also know there are times when you have to take a look at protecting your own interests here, particularly when you have another country that's promoting unfair practices to level that playing field.
But would you support 10% tariffs across the board?
Across the board, I'd want to engage in that conversation a little further. I think that's part of our, as a Senate, to look at policies like that. Unilateral across the board, something that you want to be thoughtful about. And I think I'd be more inclined to do targeted type tariffs like that versus something that's just universal. But that'd be, we got to study that. President Trump hasn't been elected yet. We don't have a Republican majority in the Senate yet, but I think we're on our way.
Okay. Last question. In my conversations with people on the Hill, your name frequently comes up as someone they're watching is a potential Senate leader contender. I know that you're focused on winning the majority right now, but are you considering throwing your hat in the ring?
You just answered the question. I'm focused on winning the Senate majority. And I'll stay with that answer all the way until... No, I tell you, until we have got a lot of work in front of us between now and the election. You look at, and of course, May through July polls are not usually indicative, especially in presidential years, looking at the data. But we've got a lot of work to do between now and November 5th. I'll have a conversation with you there. How about November 6th or 7th? Actually, make sure we know make sure we have a majority leader election in the U.S. Senate.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Senator, for your time. Up next, looking forward to a conversation of View from the Top with Eugene Scott.